Good afternoon. My name is Veronica Pérez-Picasso. I'm the Cambio Center coordinator, and I'm welcoming you to the presentation Expressions of Invisible Bodies, Afro-Latinx American Writers. Today we have the pleasure of hearing some wonderful presentations. Just a couple of things before, please, we ask you that you keep your microphone on mute so that there's no interference with the presenters. Please hold your questions until at the end of the presentations. We'll answer questions at that moment. And you can post your questions in the chat box, and we'll try to get through as many questions as we can at the end of the presentations. Okay. So we'll begin this program with Dr. Guadalupe Pérez-Anzaldo. She's Associate Professor in the School of Languages, Literatures, and Cultures at MU. And she is also a Cambio Fellow and a Cambio Board member. Let us hear her research presentation. Go ahead, Dr. Guadalupe.
Thank you so much, Veronica. So my presentation is going to cover different aspects of Mexican-American art and historic events. At the beginning, I thought just presenting about the Mexican-American writers, but later on I decided to change a little bit the topic because I consider very important aspects of art and history to be covered. So that's why I want to start, and actually I would like to focus in Mexican-American women and language and identity. I titled my presentation. So it's going to be a very eclectic overview. So I hope you enjoy the travel through time and space, because I'm going to be jumping from one space to another. And first of all, I would like to start referring to Natalia Anciso. She was born in Texas in 1985. So she is very young, Chicano artist. So I decided to include Natalia Anciso because I really consider her art to be very important in terms of the different perspectives that she offers. And first of all, I would like you to notice how she decided to take the traditional art associated with female people. So she decided to focus in this traditional art that can be used in domestic spaces, just like you can see here in the pictures, and even with practical issues, practical uses like this one, the handkerchief that you see at the corner. So for me, it was very important to include her because, as I mentioned, it seemed that her art is very traditional, but once you get closer to it, then you will notice some very important aspect that she is denouncing. So she is an advocate for social justice and through art. That's what she does. So here is a collection called Pinches Rinches. It's an ongoing series, looks at the suppressed historical events surrounding the executions and lynchings of Mexicans and Tejanos by Texas Rangers along the Texas borderlands post-Texas Revolution. So here are the drawings that she does in those handkerchiefs that you see in those domestic spaces. This is a closer look to those paintings. You can see how she combines the beautiful colors of flowers, and then kind of hidden, you can see here this figure of a Mexican man being executed by the Texas Rangers. So the quality of her art is that it contains different messages and different perspectives, as I mentioned. So it is basically a counter-hegemonic contemporary art, which offers new interpretations of a hidden reality the life and death of Mexican, which continues to be erased. So it is very hidden, this part of the history of the US. It is not included in dominant historical narrative. As I mentioned, look how she's combining the bright colors of flowers, which symbolizes life and beauty, with the dark colors, black and white, of the figures who are executing this Mexican man here. So she is inspired by this traditional domestic art as a means to denounce extreme violence against Mexicans who has been, as I mentioned, erased in history books. When the spectators approaches that particular spectator, she or he is shocked because she realizes or he realizes that the beautiful colors cover the brutality, the irrationality of men. So here in the next series of drawing, you will see more violence against the pinches rinches are here, and the figures of people being killed, the Mexican men, are right here. So Anciso is using different strategies, combining colors, combining the idea of life represented by these flowers with death, and combines these bright colors with these, as I mentioned, white and black colors, which represent tragedy, death. So the life of the flower is brief, is very short, much like that of the human, which are represented here. So Anciso retake the Mexican cultural tradition of honoring the concept of death, but it is more in her purpose is to recover that collective memory that has been obliterated by the dominant historical discourse. And as you can see with this figure right here, the violence that she is representing, it is not only directed to men like here, but also to women. And that actually happened. And those deaths, those lynching of Mexicans are not really included in most of the history books. And I would like to focus on this violence against women because Mexican women are assassinated as animals, as prey, to be hung as a trophy. So it seems that the idea here is the bad wits need to be destroyed just because of this irrationality. And as I mentioned, her art seems to be beautiful, but she is using her art as a critique at denouncing that violence. And I would like now to go to the statistics. It had been since 1848, and this is supposed to be mostly the period when the lynching of Mexicans happened, 1848 to 1928. And William D. Corrigan, he was mentioning how in the previous books published about this topic, he never found any information about the lynching of Mexicans. So for him, it was very important to try to recover those numbers, to try to collect those statistics. So he did a very interesting research by looking at the newspapers and the obituaries to check that information. And he found out that a total of, at least he could corroborate the total of 597 lynching of Mexicans. But as he mentioned, a lot of deaths are not counted because Mexicans are considered people of color. So when they were lynched or executed, those statistics were included with all the African American people who were executed. So it is very difficult to find the exact numbers, but that is research that needs to be done. And I hope that more historians focus on that. So now we are going to a different period of time, and I'm going to refer to the so-called Mexican-American War. After the Mexican-American War happened, it ended with the Tratado de Guadalupe Hidalgo, which supposedly protect the life of Mexicans, decided to live in this part of the border. It is an old saying by Mexicans at the time. They said, we didn't cross the border crossed us. And that was so true. So the Tratado de Guadalupe Hidalgo supposed to protect the Mexican people who remain in this part of the border. And because of that treaty, the Tratado de Guadalupe Hidalgo, so I'm going now to focus in California, particularly in California, in the California Constitution of 1849. You have this idea of having the English and the Spanish language as both official languages. It is included in that particular Constitution of California. So English and Spanish is supposed to be the official languages of the state. But through the years, that idea was being also erased, forgotten. And now the Act 2348 include, as you can see, in the courts, the traductions that are made in the court can be made in different languages, and Spanish is included with all the other foreign languages as a way to not accepting the privilege of the Spanish language and not respecting the Tratado de Guadalupe Hidalgo. So that is also important. And now I'm going to focus on a different artist. Now I want to refer to another art, Selena, the Texas singer. In this movie, I'm going to play only one short clip of the reason why I decided to play that short clip is because it covers different aspects of Mexican Americans. As you were listening in this movie directed by Gregory Nava in 1997, it is pointing out a very big problem, which is that Mexicans always being considered as immigrants, the perpetual immigrants. And
2 minutes.
here, so here we have this social criticism that you can see in the movie. But most importantly, again, I want to focus on the women. So significantly, this bus driver is the father, the patriarch. He is in control of Selena's bus as he is in control of her decisions in life. So he is complaining about the life of Mexican Americans, but for women, it's even harder than for Chicano men. So for challenges confronted by Mexican American men are hard, but they are even harder for women. So I didn't have enough time to present everything, but I just want to give you a general idea of different aspects of Mexican Americans that probably you didn't know, especially those lynching and executing historical aspects that probably you want to do more research about, but I just wanted to share with you this information. So thank you very much, Veronica, and you can continue.
Thank you very much. We'll continue now with Ginna She'll be presenting the importance of including Afro-Latino literature in school curriculums. She's a journalist and educator who currently lives in Washington, D.C. She's a PhD candidate in the School of Languages, Literatures, and Cultures at MU. Adelante, Ginna, please.
Yeah. Good afternoon. First of all, I want to thank Cambio Center and the University of Missouri for this invitation. And I would like to start this presentation with a brief activity I do with my Spanish class for 9 and 10 graders. I want you to imagine that you are writing a graphic novel about a superhero. Just imagine who this superhero is and which superpower they have. I will give you a few seconds to think about this. Now I would like to ask you some questions and respond to yourself honestly. Is the superpower of your hero flying or being invisible? Is your superhero a woman? Is your superhero African American or Afro-Latino? Usually when I ask these questions to my students, only a minority have imagined a Black superhero. This seems to be an interesting fact considering that 77% of the student population in DCI school belongs to the African American and Latino community. This leads us to the question, why it is so difficult for students to imagine a Black character in literature? I believe one of the reasons is the lack of Afro-Latino literature in school curriculums. For example, when I was a student in the public education system in Puerto Rico, I don't remember reading a short story where the main character was an Afro-Latino. My experience with books that were the racial topic was at the university level. However, the books I read during my undergrad years were focused on slavery. Also, those few characters were prostitutes, criminals, and sometimes even with some kind of speaking disability. Nothing different from what we see on television. It is important to clarify that history and slavery must be discussed in class, but with the fact that we do not study Afro-Latino community for over 12 years of school, what effect does it have on us as a society? What happens when we do not talk about racial plurality and cultural contributions about our Afro-Latino leaders and what they have meant to the social politics on the island? What happens is denial, a mental detachment from your heritage because people do not want to be part of the ignored group. In the census of 2019-2020, the result of Puerto Rico's race distribution was almost 66% white and 11% Black. In other words, in Puerto Rico's imaginary identity, we are almost as white as Switzerland, a country with 69% of the population identify as white European. The numbers do not represent the reality. The data brings us to new questions. Why Puerto Ricans do not recognize themselves as Afro-Latinos? What is the relationship between education and the imaginary identity? And what can we do to start conversations about internalized racism? When I started teaching, I realized that the situation of absence of Afro-Latino literature in school curriculum still remains. The Spanish and literature curriculums in schools follows an European vision, which means that only canonical authors are studied, authors who can mostly be described as white, high class, heterosexual, and men. There is no doubt that these canonical authors have contributed significantly to Hispanic literature. However, we can manage to select some of them and give some space to writers who also had so much to share, authors whose voices are similar to those students who cannot imagine a Black character in literature. In Latin America, one of the ways that the Afro-Latino community suffers exclusion and racism is by invisibilization of this population and their work in the educational context. The result of the exclusion causes students to feel unrepresented in the classroom, but also they are not exposed to the history, problems, and contributions and culture of their own community. In fact, they do not consider these aspects to be important enough to be discussed and have difficulties identifying themselves and developing feeling of belonging in the society. In some schools, they even celebrate Afro-Latino Night. Although the initiative pretends to add diversity and representation in the classroom, the way it is perceived by students is as a little minority thing to cover once a year. The combination of all these results increase the possibility for them being what is called a student at risk. The National Center for Education Statistics data shows that Black and Hispanic students are the two biggest population of students at risk in the United States. As educators, how can we address students at risk? An initiative I have been practicing during the last 2 years is including Afro-Latino literature in the classroom in response to the online movement Ennegrece tu Prontuario, which is led by Spanish and history teachers who are working together to provide a better education in Puerto Rican public schools. The idea is to expose students to Afro-Latino figures and their work in order to make the learning experience more diverse and inclusive. One of the authors we have studied in class is the Puerto Rican writer Jolanda Arroyo Pizarro. In 2019, she published the poetry book Afrofeministamente. With this book, the author proposes a new way of educating our children. She started by rewriting popular children's songs in order to teach them racial and gender equality from very early age. She also includes poems for what she had called Afro-Reparación. The poem under this section invites the reader to identify personal damages caused by racism in order to cancel its negative effects on us. The book ends with a poem titled Juramento de Renuncia al Racismo, with which students compromise to never be racist, to not allow racist attacks, and to respect and love our African heritage. Another author studied in class was Francisco Cuaribi, who is also Puerto Rican. In this case, we discussed the drama de Gigantes. The play explains how racism is manifested in the island and in Latin America by promoting the incorrect idea of mejorar la raza. This means that people are encouraged to marry white people in order to have lighter skinned children. The dynamic of blanqueamiento occurs because the society silently recognizes the privilege that comes with having lighter skin in the country. The book also narrates the segregation of Black people in the island, including inside our own families. Another important aspect of the play is the valorization of la bomba puertorriqueña. I combine the literature with other resources, which has allowed us to talk in the class about different related topics and current affairs like racism in marketing, racial bullying, the Black Lives Matter movement, and the urgency of racial justice. We also have a virtual interview and bomba tutorial with Tamboricua. In my experience in education, including Afro-Latino literature in our curriculum has had positive effects on students, and they do feel here safe, open to talk, and represented inside the classroom. But instead of me talking about it, I prefer you to hear it directly from some of them. I will play only one, but you can listen the other ones later.
I've been a student of Senora Gina's for 2 years now, and when she introduced herself to my parents and I, she introduced herself as an author, which is really inspiring because it has kind of an ethos effect, just showing you how much she can really help you. And then following that, just as important as having a diverse learning environment with a diverse set of teachers is reading a diverse set of material. For example, most recently, we read a play titled Gigantes by Francisco Cuaribi, and the analysis that we did in those lessons taught me so much about racism in Latin America that I didn't even realize that I didn't know. And so, as a student who is passionate about injustice and prejudice, seeing how little I knew about that passion outside of my own country was surprising, to say the least. And so, giving students well rounded material will raise a well rounded generation, which is something that we practice with every unit in my class.
Okay. So to close this presentation, I would like to do another short activity. Sorry, I got out of. Here we go. Okay. So to close this presentation, I would like you to do another short activity. I will ask you to observe the image and respond to yourself. How many Afro-Latinos do you see on Hispanic movie covers on Netflix? For centuries, Blackness has been taught inside and outside the classroom as something negative, something to regret and to be ashamed of. Going back to our first activity, the reason why students struggle to struggle to imagine Black characters in literature and in other forms of art, the reason why they find it hard to see positive role models and Afro descendants having any form of power is because they do not believe it is possible to have them. They have been constantly told by the media, the government, books, films, the society, that Blackness is equal to bad. They do not see any good meaning of being Afro-Latino because they take as a fact the idea of Black is equal to inferior. Therefore, they feel it is impossible to battle the argument and easier to avoid or deny Blackness as much as possible. I would like to invite you to enrich school curriculums by including Afro-Latino authors, but the inclusion has to be constant and not one night over the academic year. Some ways to do this is by including photos of Afro-Latinos in our presentations and activities, giving them readings about Afro-Latinos artists and athletes, having circles to talk about feelings and concerns regarding political and social affairs, exposing them to other forms of art and contributions done by Afro-Latinos and showing them how much they matter, and doing some positive narration about their current performance in the class and in their future. The mentioned teaching practices and the studying of Afro-Latino literature give our students a balanced and healthy learning experience, as well as the opportunity to know that another world is possible, one of equality and justice, full of Black skilled characters and Afro-Latino superheroes with amazing superpowers, contributing to make that war happen.
Thank you very much, Ginna. So our final presenter for this afternoon is Anyi Mosquera, and she is going to share some of her poetry work this afternoon. And just to tell you a little bit about Anyi, her research focuses on race and the marginalization of Black figures in Latin American narratives. She's finishing her MA at the School of Languages, Literatures, and Cultures at MU. So please, let's welcome Anyi to present. And I'll be sharing her PowerPoint over here.
Thank you so much. I feel honored to be here. Thank you to Cambio Center and the University of Missouri. I'm gonna share two of my points. They are completely different because I want to show that diversity also in writing. Yes. First, I would like to say that we all are connected through poetry. We all are connected, and that's what I do. That I like to reflect in my writings. So the first point is titled "Them." Go ahead, Veronica. I'm gonna read it in Spanish, but you can follow out the reading in English. So it says, me dijeron que debía imitarlos, hablar como ellos, caminar como ellos. Debía dejar mi cultura y adaptarme a la suya. Desnudaron mi cuerpo frente al espejo. E iniciaron a hablar de mí, a hablarme. Dijeron que mi cabello era demasiado duro. Debía alisarlo, debía recogerlo. Dijeron que mi cuerpo era exuberante y provocador. Hablaron del tono de mi voz. Dijeron que era muy alto. Tenía que controlar mis emociones al hablar. Así fui perdiendo mi esencia, mi voz, en una cultura que no es la mía. Me fui pareciendo a ellos, a imitar su acento, y aún así me siento como una ficha rota, porque ya no encajo ni en su cultura ni en la mía. Okay, I would like to talk about that point. Something happened to me in 2008. No, actually it was like last year. I went to visit my host mother in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So we were talking, me and her assistant, we were talking on the street, and someone said, "Hey, you are talking too loud." It was loud. We're not talking too loud. So I started thinking about that episode, and so I decided to write that point to reflect that this is a collective experience. It happens to me. You know, I'm sure that I'm not the only one. So someone maybe has experience as a Black person, as a Black woman, experience those kind of episodes. So that's what inspired me to write that point. The second one. Okay, the second one is completely different, but I like it. It says, sé que pocas veces te escribo, quizá nunca lo hago, pero esta noche, simple y fría noche, quiero escribirte, decirte que eres increíble, eres precioso, maravilloso. Sí, ahora que lo pienso, pocas veces te escribo. A ti no te asustan mis lágrimas, mis heridas. Tu presencia es como el aroma de las flores en primavera. No entiendo tu lógica, porque siempre levito en las mías. Sé que pocas veces te escribo, pero no podía dejar pasar esta noche, esta madrugada, este momento. Thank you so much.
There we go. Sorry. Thank you so much, Anyi. Appreciate you sharing some of your work. If anybody has any questions that would like to ask one of our speakers, please please share them at this moment.
Hi, I have a question. I don't know if I should have raising my hand or something like that, but well, I want to say that I enjoy all the presentations. It was a great variety of themes, and all of them very interesting with different perspectives. But mainly, I have a question for Ginna, and it's regarding the curriculum. So I noticed she's doing great changes in and incorporating Afro-Latino literature in her curriculum or her classroom is really something that should be done, and I'm excited about that. But my question is, how difficult has it been to incorporate that literature? Have you had the support from, I don't know, the principal or the people in charge of that, or do you have complete freedom in terms of the books or the material that you choose to include in your class, or how does it work for you?
Well, in my case, I'm very lucky that I have a very wide freedom to select what I'm going to include and use in the classroom for the students. However, it still have to meet some certain criteria. But yeah, I have managed to find different literature, books, authors that match those criteria. So I can still do what I want in the classroom, and I don't feel limited by the school in any way, because, well, there are some standards that you have to meet in each school you teach. That will be the norm in any school you teach. But yeah, I'm very lucky to have the opportunity to basically select any class material I want to use in the classroom.
Also, a clarification. I believe the school you are working at right now, it has a different, I don't know, approach to Spanish literature or language, right? Because
Yes.
that doesn't happen in all the schools.
Exactly.
Or in every school. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's a school that is focused on foreign languages, and that also helps because it kind of have a very good appreciation of diversity, and they value culture, and they value hearing other voices as part of the learning process they want to implement in the classroom. So that helps a lot. So one more time, I'm very lucky.
Okay, thank you, Ginna. I think that answered my question.
Thank you. Matt Soria, you had a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think my camera is not connected, sorry. Well, thank you so much for the 3 presentations. They were really, really interesting. And I really enjoyed them. I have 2 questions. One is for Anyi, because I never listened to her reciting her poems, and I think they're just wonderful. And I wanted to ask her, Anyi, you've been talking about how race influences your writing these poems, but I was wondering, how does the intersection between gender and race impact or had an influence in these poems? That's for Anyi. And I don't know, should I ask the second one this is for Guadalupe?
Why doesn't Anyi answer, and then we'll move to Guadalupe. That way we don't forget the questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Amar, for your question. I don't try to put gender or to include gender in my writing. I see the problem as a whole, okay, as a Black community, okay, even male and female alone. So I try to reflect that, because it's not me just as a woman. They are male that suffer the same problem. They don't talk about it. Maybe I don't know why, but I think I can do it. Me as a woman, I can do it, and I feel like the necessity to do it, the need to do it. Sorry. So I don't focus on gender, or I had to write about women because I had to write about another Black woman. No, I had to write about a whole community, a Black community.
Thank you, Anyi. That's very interesting. We need to talk, Anyi, about those poems. I really like them.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amar.
Yeah, and my second question is for Guadalupe, and actually this just I'm very interested. I mean, I really enjoyed what you talked about in general, Guadalupe, but I was very interested in the first piece of art or pieces of art that you showed by Enciso. Especially that combination between the domestic and you know, what we would say public or life and death. I don't know, could you tell us a little bit more about how this is, like, how this is framed within let me see, like, she writes this from Texas, okay, and I'm thinking like how Mexico or Mexican culture is sold abroad, but also how Mexican culture, which is part of Texas too, is sold to not only Mexican Americans, but also to Anglos. And if this has something to do with the colors and the flowers, I don't know, I'm just wondering.
Well, I consider for her it's important to remember, to bring the collective memory alive. So even though she is referring to the Anglo culture, because as I mentioned, you see all these guys there, the pinches rangers, as she called them, the Texas Rangers. In my opinion, she's trying to insert that part of the history that belongs to the US, and that is why it's inserted in these colors, but at the same time, it's not something that she wants to celebrate, but actually to denounce. So by making this combination, as you mentioned, she is referring to different aspects of the culture, that it is not only referring to Mexican Americans, but at the same time, as I mentioned, she is denouncing the irrationality of white men in here. So for her, it is more important to focus in these hidden figures and that part of the history of the US that has been erased, hidden, that it is right there, but it seems that nobody wants to uncover that history.
Yeah, and I think that relates to gender expectations and our cultural expectations in general. When you think about Mexican culture in the US, I think people usually think about bright colors and happy stuff, you know. But she's playing with that, and she's using kind of the shock factor, like, here you are, you know, it's not just flowers.
Exactly. And as I mentioned, also the idea of this domestic art, because that is something that has been traditionally associated with women. So she takes this domestic space just more powerful by doing this social criticism in that particular art, saying, okay, we as women, we can create art, but it is not just beautiful art, but it is a very powerful art, that it is a counter-hegemonic discourse in here. So that is basically what she's trying to do.
Yeah, it's really, really cool.
Yeah, I really love it when I found out about her. I have actually more Chicana artists. I was planning to focus in another one just because of the time I didn't have the opportunity, but it is very interesting. In the future, I would like to publish an article about the Chicana artists, actually.
That would be a cool idea. Yeah, that is a cool idea. Thank you, Guadalupe.
Thank you.
Thank you. Seth, you have a question?
I do. I want to join everybody else in saying thank you for really wonderful presentations all the way around. It's so cool to see pedagogy and aesthetics and criticism brought together in one panel and hear different approaches in dialogue with one another. So I'm really thankful for all three presentations. The one question I have here comes from somebody who is very much a Europeanist, and it's for Guadalupe. When I see a firing squad in visual art, I think of Goya, and particularly the disasters of war. And I'm wondering if there is a citation or a kind of appropriation of this tradition of representing armed violence of men against unarmed individuals that's in play in the works that you were describing so beautifully. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Seth. I consider that all artists have to have influence of somebody else, of course. And I don't deny that it is possible that she got that influence of the Goya art, but at the same time that she is kind of focusing in very particular aspect of Texas history, because it is something that it is relevant so much right now. So now that you can see people being so proud of, having this conference in Zoom with all the rifles and all the arms behind them. So, so I consider that she was having in mind the reality around her, because that is, she's taking into consideration the history, but at the same time, putting that history in the present moment, saying how that past can be contextualized in the present time. So in my opinion, even though she is referring to the past in order to denounce those killing of Mexicans and lynching of Mexicans, but at the same time, she is kind of focusing in the present and saying that is not something that just belongs to the past, but it is affecting us right now. So in my opinion, even though, as I mentioned, she may have some influence, she focused in her reality that it is right in front of her eyes. Thank you for your question, Seth.
Thank you, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question in the chat, and it's a question for Anyi, asking, can you talk a bit about the poetic, the poetic tradition that you're working in?
Yes, but can you give more context for the question, please?
Martha, do you want to say something just so she can answer?
Sure. Sorry for my lack of a camera. Well, first of all, thanks to all of you for these wonderful presentations, and thank you so much for sharing your own work. I don't speak Spanish, so I could understand words only here and there. But one of the things that you talked about in response to an earlier question is the ways you're talking about social dynamics around race and how that comes into your work. Can you talk a little bit more about what the tradition of that is that you're aware of in Afro-Latino poetry? Who do you draw on as poets, whether in that community or in other communities? I'd just love to hear a little bit more about the context for your work.
The context for my work, how I get the ideas of my work, That's what you mean? Or the translation
Sure.
part? Or the translation part?
So, well, so I work on poetry a lot myself, mostly Russian poetry. But, you know, so ideas are definitely part of it, but I also think about like structural features, like what does the poem look like on the page? What does it sound like? I'm sorry if those feel like abstract questions, but I'm just interested in maybe what inspires you is maybe a more kind of straightforward way to ask it.
Okay. My work is like I use my personal experience, and also I use the experience of others. Like, for example, now that I'm here in the US, I think it's a great opportunity for me to write about, because I had the opportunity to surround myself with an international community. I know people from different parts of the world, different countries, especially Africa, and they talk about their experiences, and I try to reflect on that, so and write about it, and I see that, and I can see myself in them, and I try to reflect that, and also that they can see themselves in my writing. So one experience, I have a friend from here to the US, and I used to share my writing with her, and she said, "Oh, Anyi, I feel related. I feel related with your work, with your poetry." And so that's what that's where I from where I get my like my musa, like Spanish, my inspiration.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Any other questions? Anybody else?
Yes, I had a question for all of you. Fascinating talk. Thank you so much, Guadalupe. Thank you so much, Ginna and Angie. And one question that I was, you know, at the moment to see that the clip from Selena, the movie, and the perspective of Chicanos, right? So I was wondering if that perspective is possible, like to reflect, like what is the perspective of the Chicano, you know, know how he's looked by, you know, people in the United States or Mexicans, but how he looks them. Right. And with that question, I also, it was very interesting because listening to Angie, no, is the title of her poem, no? Them, ellos, right? So how that poet, no, perceive through those experience, how she's perceiving, no, those collected in them, right? And also that would be the same question for Ginna, talking about that Afro-feministamente, to give that look back, no? How, in what terms would be that possible? That would be a question for the three of them. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Erica. Yeah, as you mentioned, this particular clip, it is cited by a lot of people that want to refer to the problematic identity of Chicanos because they feel part of this country, they feel they belong here, but at the same time they want to belong to Mexico. And there's an interior conflict of identity just because they don't feel completely accepted, neither there nor here. And that is why I was mentioning how difficult, how complicated it is for the whole community of Mexican Americans to try to find that liminal space, as Gloria Anzaldo referred to the borderlands, where you can feel without any problem, like feeling you belong to the place you want to belong. And that particular liminal space is that empowers you, just like Gloria Anzaldo referred to borderland. And for me, it is very significant that even though this father is complaining about difficulties of being accepted in Mexico just because Selena speaks Spanish a little funny, the problem here is that he doesn't want to risk, and Selena is willing to do that. So that's why I was focusing in the female character in this particular clip, but it is referring to Selena as an artist who really want to challenge any border. So she was crossing borders all the time. So she was able to be so famous because she didn't want to put her like barriers. She said, I can go to Mexico and sing in Mexico and speak Spanish in Mexico, and I can come back and speak English here without any problems. So that confidence that she felt, it is just because she felt empowered by just being that liminal person that Gloria Anzaldo was referring later on. So that is my idea. Thank you.
Thank you.
Angie?
Yes, it's very interesting question, Erica. And I like something that the father of the movie said, that it's exhausting to try to prove yourself. I am Mexican, I'm American, I'm Mexican American. So it's exhausting to try to prove ourselves, like the voice, my accent is perfect, it's American enough. So it's that's why the points come from, like, I don't fit in the culture and in their culture, and I don't fit in my culture. So I don't know if it's clear the answer, but thank you so much, Erica, for your question.
Thank you.
Ginna?
Yes, this book it's very interesting because you kind of can see her own journey. She's reflecting on her own journey, and it started when she had her daughter, and it shares how the first racist attacks her daughter received were from her own family. Puerto Rico, it's as many other Latin America countries, we have sort kind of diversity at home because you have different skin tones inside the same family. My family is an example of that. And that's very common. But even when this is very common, you can still see how inside a family people experience racism, and people feel they have to prove constantly they are worth it. And to give a very simple example, my older sister, she is Black, and I mean by Black that she's dark skinned, so it's more visible. And the bullying and the racism she got at school was significantly more than what I get at school. And we have the same background, we have the same parents, we live in the same house, we had the same teachers, we have everything exactly the same. The only difference is she's darker than me. And that experience, you can, similar to my experience, you can see it also on the book, and you can identify with the book because it's kind of the way racism is shown in Puerto Rico and manifested. When I moved to the States, it was one of the things that I couldn't verbalize how racism was, because it's a kind of a different racism. And I tried to explain people, but the racism in Puerto Rico is different, and people couldn't understand me what I was trying to say. And it took me a few years to get there. And then I realized, okay, racism is basically feeling ashamed, feeling you don't belong, feeling that you have less rights. This is how it is more in Latin America. In United States, it's being afraid of being alive. So it's kind of a different racism. It's still violence, but it was kind of difficult to me to understand how it's manifested in the United States versus in Latin America. Another thing that I would like to add about the book is that I forget. Yeah, well, you can see the reflection that she does, and she even recognized, if I would have had back then the knowledge I have now, I would have reacted this other way, and I would have been more brave, and I would have defend better my daughter, etc. So it's very simple poetry, but at the same time so rich, so full of feelings, sadness and happiness at the same time. And it not only talk about race, it also focus a lot about gender, and differently from what Anyi said before, the author recognized that being Black, it's hard. Being a Black woman is even harder, as Dr. Guadalupe was saying, in Puerto Rico, because Puerto Rico is a very machista culture. So it's being bombed with a lot of racism, but also when you are a woman, you have to deal also with being hated by the society. So so she's trying to invite readers to break with that cycle of violence. So I really will, if you have the chance to read the book, I will really recommend it to go over it. It's a very beautiful art.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, we're out of time. We've actually gone a little bit over our time. I don't want to take up more time from all of you. I'll be sharing the presentations with you I'll send you an email with the link. We'll be posting them on our YouTube channel. So if you have people that you think, oh, they need to watch this, please share the link of the presentations. Again, thank you so much to Guadalupe, to Ginna, and to Anyi for taking time and presenting this wonderful work. I really appreciate it. This event is sponsored by the Cambio Center and is part of Black History Month. Thank you so much, and have a good evening.
Great. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Thank you.